Alright, so welcome back to the Mean Gene Composition Notebook of Knowledge. So this is your basic formula for a 12-bar blues in the key of E. So all the E's I have highlighted in green with the corresponding 1 and highlighter next to them because the E is the 1 chord. All the A's are highlighted in yellow with the 4 next to that because the A in this case is the 4 chord. And then the B's are in orange and those have a 5 next to them because that's the 5 chord. Alright, wrote some of the variations and other nonsense that you could do in this chord progression in here just as an example of where some of this would go, but we're not really going to worry about that a whole lot right now. But what I want you to focus on is this is the basic form, right? So you have 4 bars of E, 2 bars of A, followed by 2 bars of E again. The last 4 bars is where most of your confusion is probably coming from. So you have a bar of B, a bar of A, a bar of E, a bar of B, and then straight back to the beginning, right? To say that with the numbers corresponding to the chords, you'd have 4 bars on the 1 chord, 2 bars on the 4 chord, 2 bars on the 1 chord, a bar on the 5 chord, a bar on the 4 chord, a bar on the 1 chord, a bar on the 5 chord, and then back to the beginning. There's multiple different ways of doing this. There's almost unlimited variations of this form, but I think this is a pretty easy way to grasp it in the beginning stages, right? And if you're playing the chugga chugga kind of blues riff dun, 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 throughout this whole thing, it might sound kind of robotic at first, but once you get good enough, you get familiar with this form to the point where you can start adding variations and these like build-up licks and these bars. Maybe you add the A chord in this bar to make it a quick change blues. You could do a long 5 here if you want. You could do a long 1. You could do, you know, the turnaround on these last 2 bars, which is a pretty strong sound of the blues, right? Having the turnaround on the last 2 bars. Once you start adding in all these subtle variations and licks and what have you, it really starts to sound like something. But at first, you really need to just focus on the basic form, play it with that chugga chugga riff, or play it with the chords, right? So if you don't want to play it with the chugga chugga riff, you can play it with just chords. There's 2 different ways to do that. You could play all 7 chords, meaning you play E7 anytime you're on the 1 chord here, which is E. Play A7 anytime you're on the 4 chord, and play B7 anytime you're on the 5 chord in these positions. To simplify that even further, you can play just regular E anytime it's the 1 chord, regular A anytime it's the 4 chord, and then play B7 anytime it's the 5 chord. So in that example, you'd have E, A, and B7, right? Which is a way to do it. You can just strum through that with the strumming pattern, or you can play kind of a more choppy style rhythm to just, you know, fill out the mix in a band setting or something like that, right? There's all different kinds of variations. Just one example is what I have written here. This would be like a more typical jazz sound. I don't expect you to play this, this is just an example, right? Like in this bar, you could go 6 dominant 7, which would be C sharp dominant 7. This bar you could go to the 2, which would be F sharp 7. You could go to the 5 in this bar, B7, and then the rest of the progression would be the same. You know, just changing 3 bars, you'd have a completely different sound, even though the rest of the form is staying exactly the same, right? Something else important to note, E7, E dominant 7, those are both the exact same chord. So if I annotated, you know, an E7 chord like this, it's exactly the same chord, it's just a different way of saying the same thing. A7 and A dominant 7, B7 and B dominant 7, these are both the same thing, right? So those may get used interchangeably. I may say them interchangeably, or you may hear them that way, but those are both the same chord. You know, a 7 chord and a dominant 7 chord are one in the same. So how you would count this is, you know, 95% of the time this is going to be in 4/4 time, right? So it's what's really important is that you play all of this correctly with the right time, the correct number of bars, and all that stuff. It's more of an exercise in timing and rhythm than really what you're playing. And back to the age-old adage, you know, rhythm is music. That's really the important part here. So how you would count this is 4 beats to the bar, 4/4 time. You'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the A chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just as an example, right? 4 beats to the bar. So I'll start from here. I'll kind of try to hum along to potentially what this would kind of sound like, right? With the chugga chugga rhythm, right? And now we're straight back to the beginning, right? So that's your basic formula. Playing this with a metronome is, you know, very helpful, right, to keep yourself honest. Or at least, at the very least, just tapping your foot, making sure you're counting, right? At first, it's helpful to play kind of the simplest versions of all this stuff as possible. You know, just play the simplest form of that riff. I'll explain that more when I pick up the guitar, but, you know, play just the little chugga chugga riff, or play a chord that's really simple that you know, and play it in time and try to get really that feel for the blues, right? You know, just E, A, and B7, for example, if you were doing it with chords, or just use that chunk of blues riff, right? And both of those ways, either with the chords or the chug chug riff, are perfectly acceptable ways to play blues guitar. And, you know, down the line, when you have this dialed and you're like, all right, where do we go from here? Then you can start adding in all the little variations, the little build-up licks, the little, you know, things that you can change up a little bit to make this sound a little more interesting in certain places, etc., etc. The thing about a 12-bar blues is it's just a 12-bar format here, of course, but there's an infinite amount of ways that you can play this. This is just one example. This is pretty much the exact way I learned it. I think it's kind of the simplest way of going about it. And there's some changes that happen quite a bit. Like in the turnaround here, you might only end up playing B on like half the last half of this bar, and you might extend the E out a little bit into this bar. But that's not really stuff you're truly thinking about, you know, necessarily when you're playing the blues. It's really a feel thing once you get this form kind of dialed. So I'm gonna go pick up the guitar and try to explain this as best I can. But yeah, things to take away from here: you know, make sure you're counting 4 beats to the bar, playing the correct number of bars, you know, on each chord. You got your 4 bars of E, 2 bars of A, 2 bars of E, 1 bar B, 1 bar A, 1 bar E, 1 bar B, and then back to E again, right? Do it in time, try to use a metronome, all that good stuff. And I'm gonna go pick up the guitar and try to explain this as simply as I can.